Hello, and welcome to the Talented Amateurs Podcast. My name is Joe Randolph, your host, and today we have Pate, who is the Associate Athletics Director for External Operations and Senior Woman Administrator at Longwood University in Farmville, Virginia. She has nearly 2 decades of experience in college athletics, including time as head coach and assistant coach, Director of Marketing and Promotions, and as a professor of athletics, business, and marketing. Her coaching experience spans both the Division I and Division II levels. Katie is also my former classmate at Coker University in Hartsville, South Carolina, where we both played intercollegiate NCAA basketball. So I'm really excited about today's episode as I follow her career in college athletics since leaving Coker. So let's get started. Katie, how are you doing today? And welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Joe, for having me. This is really pretty awesome. Just hearing the fact that we attended Coker University tells me how old we are because it used to be college. So just hearing the new verbiage is a little bit a little unusual, but I'm doing great this morning. Excited to be here with you.
Awesome. And I'm really looking forward to having a conversation and giving my audience an opportunity to hear your story. As I mentioned, as I followed your career, it's been, you've grown a lot, you moved around a lot. And I think it's really just a testament to your work ethic. Coaching, obviously, most people don't know, it's a hard profession. And like I tell high school athletes, particularly my nephews who are playing high school as they move into college, it's not that your coach, if he lose games, he go and teaches PE or English the next day. If you lose game in college, your coach gets fired. So it's more of it's more expectations. There's more preparation as you move from one level to the next. So I don't take coaching lightly. And I know that it's a hard profession once you get into college athletics. So as we get started, let's maybe kick off. Who is Katie Pate? Tell us a little bit more about your background, where you're from, and then we'll get more into how you got started into coaching and into administration.
Sure. So Midwestern kid, grew up in the Midwest, kind of in the basketball belt there, was born in Iowa, Grinnell, Iowa. For anybody that's familiar with the Grinnell College system, which is the town that I was born in, that's a men's basketball program that has a pretty interesting story. And then eventually kind of grew up in Minnesota and Wisconsin. So I've got just a great family, lots of little quirkiness and how relationships happen. And my parents divorced when I was young, and both parents remarried. I've got a younger sister who you know, Christy. We all went to college together, but really kind of just a great upbringing, but grew up around sports. I mean, it's the foundation of pretty much every life experience that I have. Just growing up in and around the business of basketball. We'll talk a little bit more, but I'm a Big Ten baby. Grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota. My stepmom was a head coach at the University of Minnesota, where she coached women's basketball. And at that time, there were a number of real famous coaches now operating out of that department. Ultimately, finished up my high school playing career and things in Hayward, Wisconsin, way north, home of the World Lumberjack Championships. So if you think about log rolling, or climbing poles, that's my hometown. And started off my playing career at the University of Minnesota, Duluth. So northern Minnesota, real cold, Lake Superior. Came south. It's where you and I met in the streets of Hartsville, South Carolina, as a Cobra. But those early influences really helped shape not only who I was as a person, but certainly as a professional, and where my passions and pursuits were. When anybody ever asked us as kids, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? I had the same answer. I wanted to do what my stepmom did. I wanted to be a basketball coach. However that looked, or however that journey started to come together, I always knew that being on the court is where home was. And as time goes by, that certainly evolved in all of its forms and fashions. But at the end of the day, college athletics remains in my blood. And of course, it's where I am today.
Awesome. I love that. And I forgot you started out at Minnesota.
Yeah.
What was the university?
University of Minnesota, Duluth. So Duluth, Minnesota, big D2 school up there.
Yes, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
That's right.
I was a transplant to the Cobras.
Got you. Okay. Interesting. I definitely did forget that. So great. So now so let's maybe talk more about that transition. So you played ball at Coker, and I would say you were a hell of a shooter. And and it really you were really a coach on the floor, as I've kind of had a chance to watch you play and how you were able to be that coach on the floor. It really is a testament to how you've been able to transition that into coaching and into administration. So let's talk about that in terms of your coaching career. You've had several roles and several universities. So can talk to us about your journey as you've kind of navigated that profession.
Well, I think for starters, just being exposed to the profession at such a young age really had its influence. So to kind of put it in context, I think there's a historical perspective that a lot of people need to understand, certainly as it relates to the women's game. So back in the mid to late 80s, when my stepmom was coaching at the University of Minnesota, you had a lot of pioneers in the sport coaching in the Big Ten at that time. When she retired in 1987, it was right on the cusp of when television contracts for Division I basketball were starting to emerge, when the women's game pivoted to a multimedia market. When she left, she was making $45,000 a year as the head coach at the University of Minnesota. Um, I would, I don't know Don Staley's contract details, but I think if you put $45,000 in there, that might be a per practice rate. I'm not sure, but I did also see during that kind of that transitory time in women's basketball, I saw my mom very little during that time. So getting a kind of a backstage pass to the rigors of Power Five recruiting and schedules and travel and things like that, I really fell in love with Division II basketball. It's deeply intimate. A lot of you wear a ton of hats. It's why I encourage my friends to consider assistant coaches at the Division I level to look at Division II people, because you get to have your hand in everything. You get to hand in personnel and player development and all these different aspects. And so I think for me, my experience at Coker was deeply powerful. It was where I needed to be at that point in my life. The relationships, and of course, I mean, some of the people that we got to be around, Joe, coming up through a small institution like Coker, had extraordinary influence on me. I think about our president, of course, at that time, Dr. Daniels, still remains probably one of the greatest humans I've been around, in terms of his influence on just understanding what love and compassion can do in my relationships. So it made sense that in this warm, fuzzy cocoon of Coker College, can I just kind of eke into my professional career here too? And so that's what I did. And I was working for a coach that allowed me to dip my toe in the water. And so my first coaching gig, it was a $2,500 coaching stipend. I was the part-time work study coordinator at the college, making $6.25 an hour, not to exceed 20 hours a week, living in a little tiny little place. And I mean, to me, that's where the best roots grow. When, people talk about the grind, I think sometimes the word is a little bit overused now, but it was the laundry, it was driving vans, it's kind of the purest form of college athletics, where you have no choice but to roll up your sleeves. And so I think that whole mentality really carried me through what is it even now today. But I think even more importantly, and perhaps the part that means the most to me, is being able to translate that experience to influence with young people in the profession. Student athletes, of course, just students in general, but young budding coaches, whether they're coaches or if they're going to go into administration, is the power of great work ethic and attitude and energy. And the task that nobody else wants to do, if you do that task, that's probably the one that's going to lead you to your next job. Our good friend Gene Hill said to me once, we've got to be willing to go recruit where other people aren't willing to go. You got to be able to get in your car and drive. You've got to want to make a move or take a risk, that people are just a little bit more averse to, or it takes too long, or it's a little bit too hard. When you make those decisions, most of the time good results follow, and if they don't, they certainly help teach us the lessons so that we're better prepared the next time around. So kind of all those things, you throw it into a pot, you whip it up. And at the end of the day, it's about love of the game and people. And that's what makes it so great.
Awesome. And you talked about what Jean said, that you have to make the move, and I'm a big fan of mobility, and I think the more you are open to being mobile and not tied to a location, or I want to be in this city. Talk to us about that and why that's been important and how it shaped your journey, because you've been South Carolina, Georgia, now in Virginia. So tell us more about what mobility has meant to you, and what are some of the places that you've gone to over your career.
Well, I would say a couple things. As the industry has grown, the stereotypes that you see in college athletics, I'm not quite sure if that's something that's as prevalent maybe in the business world, but there's a term people use, we just call it job jumping, where if you're constantly jumping, people start to ask questions, kind of, why are you leaving this position, or why that. That is starting to dissolve in our industry. Is a lot of times it's what you can bring to a position in a moment, and then where's your next moment going to be. But for me early on, and just understanding how being a young college coach, what that looks like, it's a steep ladder. And it's a matter of, what does my ladder look like, and where do I want it to lead to? Certainly there's some financial sides. I mean, I can't make $6.25 an hour and $2,500 on the year for very long.
Absolutely.
um, so I think for me, it has always been about the people, the fit, and God's timing for me, is, where I'm supposed to be and when I'm supposed to be there. And so early on, being able to start off at my alma mater, it was perfect. We talk about Gene, he's a huge part of my coaching story. So I'm there for a year, and our good friend gets his first head job at what was USC Spartanburg back then. It's upstate now, and they've changed their mascot. And I took a call from him, and he said, "Do you want to come with me?" And I said, "Of course I want to come with." And so he and I trekked to Spartanburg, South Carolina. And for a smooth $20,000, I had my first full-time job as an assistant basketball coach. And we were the youngest staff in the country at that time. I think he was 25 and maybe I was 24. And we made a ton of bad decisions, terrible decisions. They're the best stories that he and I could tell right now. But, interestingly, Joe, the way that things happen is, to your point, to embrace mobility is when you get to seize opportunity. And we had just finished our second season there, and he had an opportunity to go be the recruiting coordinator at East Carolina University. And his aspirations were always to be a Division I head coach eventually. And at that time, I was young, but I wanted to put in for that job. And so taking the chance, right? Taking these professional chances, seeing the value in yourself, and putting yourself out there. And I tell this story because it speaks to someone that I called Dr. Daniels, president of Coker at the time. And I said, "Dr. Daniels, can you call the AD at USC Spartanburg for me and put in a good word? I want to go for the head job." And he said, "Absolutely, I'll do that." So my call was going to give me a chance to interview. And the very next day after I called Dr. Daniels, he called me back. I'm assuming he's calling to tell me he spoke with Mike Hall. No, he said, "I want to talk to you about something." I said, "What's up, Dr. Daniels?" And he said, "Well, how would you feel about being the next head women's basketball coach at Coker?" And I said, "What? What are you talking about? I just called you yesterday for a reference with Mike." Well, that very next morning, Ann Walters had walked in and she had resigned. And in sure good business form, great leadership, Dr. Daniels says, "When's your interview for Spartanburg?" And this was on a Tuesday. My interview was on Friday. And he said, "I need an answer by Thursday." So was gonna ask for my decision before I could interview for Spartanburg. And I was standing in the kitchen with my stepfather, and he said, "What are you so nervous about?" I said, "I just don't want to make a mistake." And he said, "You got to take a chance." And so I did. And so at that was my first big move, was going back to Hartsville as the head women's basketball coach. And then after that, the decisions were much more calculated and had a deeper meaning into where those jobs were going to position me within the industry. So going from Coker to Belmont Abbey, some would have said it was a cross-conference move. We were in the same league. It actually wasn't. The scholarships were better. The budget was better. Working for an administrator like Elaine Keeby was huge. She was deeply connected to the sport. And so you just you follow this path. I would say, again, going back to the purpose of landing and choosing to be somewhere, at the cornerstone of each of those decisions has always been the familiarity or the connection to somebody within the business. Perhaps one of the most important decisions I ever made was to go work for Todd Starkey at Lenore-Ryan University. Todd and I had met each other just through the business. When I was the head coach at Belmont Abbey, I'd met him when he was the first head coach, when he first was the head coach at Lenore-Ryan. And just all of the pivots that were created off of one particular decision, knowing that it was probably going to happen that way, but really understanding, if I make this choice or I make this decision, take the blinders off and really be able to look down the road as to what this decision can do for me, and certainly what I can do for him, was probably one of the most powerful job decisions I ever made. What he helped create for me after that, really all the auxiliary pieces, the teaching, the administrative experience, the connections, the ability to really dig deep into professional development, had a lot to do with him believing in me and saying, you know what, I'm okay if I don't handcuff this coach to her desk and just let her do basketball. If I make her just do basketball, she's going to leave. So how can I create an experience for someone that allows for maximum growth and then a joyful experience while being employed? I have worked for few people like that in my life. And certainly the lessons that he allowed me to learn are the ones that I picked up along the way and try to share with the people that I've worked with or for me.
Awesome. And you talk a lot about the relationships, and obviously in your profession, the mobility is one thing, but when we talk about relationships, connections, and the importance of that, that's across any industry. So maybe talk to us about how these relationships are key in being able to build those, from Dr. Daniels, who I remember was a great man, to your connection with Gene, but then these multiple connections you were able to build. Tell us more about that, the importance of those relationships, and why it's important to make connections in the coaching industry.
Yeah. Well, I think at the end of the day, looking back now, it is, I think it's a deep understanding and commitment to, for me, professional diversity. Somewhere along the way, I must have heard it from somebody that I need to know some people that have a lot to do with basketball, but that perhaps don't have anything to do with basketball, whether they're athletic administrators or they're business people or they're people like you. I talk quite a bit about advocates, mentors, and storytellers. We talk a lot about in the industry, you've got to have great mentors. You got to have great mentors. Well, I have great mentors, but sometimes they suck on the phone. And so for me to ask them to make a call on my behalf, can they articulate my story in a way that has great salesmanship behind it, that they can get someone excited as they're making that connection for me. And so for me, the relationship side, it's a little self-serving. I'd be lying if I didn't say that it was. When people are like, God, Katie, you know everybody. Well, yeah, I do, because I might need them for something. And it's not, for me, it's not about who you know, it's about who knows me. Who can explain who Katie Pate is? Who can talk about where my steps are? Whether it's I need some schematic advice on an offensive or defensive set, that I can pick up a coach that's an expert on that particular set or that offense. If it's a personnel decision, if it's my short list for assistant coaches suddenly ran out, and I got to make calls, and I need some really good names from people that I really trust. And that's work. I mean, you know that it's everybody's like, oh, let me do that handwritten note after I meet person. Absolutely, it starts with the handwritten note, but then it's what do you do after that? I'll give you a great example of today's version of that for me. I was blessed to be on a summit call for college athletic. It was a college athletics leadership symposium, and my boss had put me on this roundtable where I got to listen to some people. So one of the roundtables was run by a woman with Ventura Partners, which is a search firm, kind of a boutique search firm in the college athletics industry. Um, Lots of jobs, things like that. And they're associated with the ACC commissioner search right now for the new commissioner position. So anyway, we're on this call and we're in COVID, and all those tricks, all those things that I've been using for 25 years to make those connections, Joe, are kind of, can't use all of them right now because we can't do what we normally do, right? Because of COVID. So I asked her on this roundtable, I said, well, Katie, what do you recommend for people like me who are highly external based, how to create a connection with someone that, I can't use the handshake, I can't use body language, I can't use, all this voice inflection and eye contact and all these different things. And she said, well, you're an external person. I know you guys got a bunch of gadgets and stuff sitting around in your office. Be really purposeful in your thank yous. Make sure that the content that you're sending somebody absolutely reminds them of who you were on that call. So I was like, okay, note to self. I'm like taking notes on this. So fast forward, I can't get this woman's address. I can't find it anywhere. There's 3 offices. They're all over the country, but she doesn't work in one of those offices. So I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do? So I have her email address. So I do this super cheesy video of me reading the thank you note to her. And just to be sure that she remembers who I am, I hold up a bobblehead that I have for her. We have all these leftover bobbleheads from our President Reevely's inauguration, like 7 or 8 years ago. So I'm like, this is your bobblehead. And if I can ever send it to you, you're going to get this in the mail. So I email her the video. I promise within 15 minutes, I get an email back from her. Oh my God, this is the greatest. This is the greatest. Thank you I've ever gotten. So now I've gotten on the phone with her twice. She sent me a link to a deputy AD search that she wanted me to consider. And for someone that has literally no game on the administrative side, my pool of contacts is this big. If you're on coaching, it's this big. But so for me to be in a conversation with someone like her, just by listening, is really, really, really important. And that's how I make moves, to your point about mobility. That's how I do it, is by listening to what the other person says and suggests, and then kind of amplifying it a little bit to make those experiences extremely memorable and let them know that I heard everything that you said, and this is who I am. So.
No, I love that. I think that is a really great story, and it's really the important thing. How do you make friends before you need them?
Ooh.
And I think that is a classic.
I'm writing that down. I'm writing that down right now. I'm stealing that.
And as you mentioned, as you move more into administration, you have your coaching list that you can tap into. Then as you start to build this administrative list of people, mentors. And I actually love how you phrase storytellers, because we talk about having coaches, mentors, and sponsors, but the storyteller in your circle is key, because you're right. Everyone cannot tell your story, and they could be a sponsor for you, but are they the storyteller that can sell you? And so I think that's a really great way to put it. So I really do like that. So maybe let's talk about you as you moved into administration. Tell us about that and some of your role that you're playing now at Longwood as the associate athletics director for external operations, and then we'll get into your other role as senior woman administrator. But tell us how that journey into administration has been thus far.
Well, I think the biggest thing. Sorry, I've got I got sunshine coming in my window. Excuse me. Try to get that off my face. Um, I think one of the biggest things, Joe, is um, when you think about external operations with certainly with the Division One athletics program, it's everything public facing. So that's fan engagement, that's boosters, that's advancement, ticketing, all things with little kids. It is the excitement piece of what we love about college sports. So if you think about someone who's been a college coach, the the natural flow, at least from my standpoint, is at the end of the day, I love basketball as much as I always have. And I love sports as much as I always have. So to make your job be about celebrating all those things that fans love and that student athletes love and coaches love, those moments, those last second, the 15 seconds left on the clock, and you've got your scenario is being a part of the celebration is really really cool. All of the experiences leading up to that, I mean, I've done that every day for 20 years, is to prepare for the pressure cooker situation and the trophy at the end, or the success at the end. I would say there is a particularly unique piece to this, in that my ability to connect with coaches is very different than what traditional administrators have the ability to do. And it's just purely being able to speak the same language. Administrators that have not coached can't understand why our brains are completely insane, can't understand why we're paranoid, can't understand why the pressure that sits on your shoulders as a head coach makes you absolutely a control freak. So there's a bonus to that, that someone like me or someone who was a coach can bring to the table. But really, at the end of the day, again, it's about people and it's about relationships, selling, recruiting, promotions, all those things that certainly at the Division II level we do every day. And so to be able to translate it, although I had some challenges trying to figure out how do I put this on paper to make me look attractive to as a prospective hire. Honest to goodness gracious, the only thing that I'm not doing is teaching post players how to do their drop steps better. I mean, it's the same thing. It really is the same thing. And to have somebody in my boss right now, um, think outside the box a little bit, and to hire someone that might have been a little bit uncharacteristic across the traditional lines of hiring, something that I make my goal, that it pays off to her for taking making a decision that some people might have thought, that resume looks a little different, is to make sure that I kind of pay her back for taking a chance on someone like me.
Great. And I think those transferable skills they play out well. And I think one of the things, you didn't say it directly, but one of the things I think is key, and I see this in all really great leaders and who are able to really evangelize an organization and people, is you bring empathy to the role. You've been in their shoes, and so you can relate to it, as you said. No matter if it's basketball or it's football or swimming or soccer, you have to be able to relate to all those coaches, and they all have these same level of concerns, worries, and things that sometimes, if you haven't been in the shoes, it's hard for you to relate. And I think that is a really great attribute that you have that will allow you to be truly a great leader in this role. And so I think that is awesome. And so now you're also the um, women's administrator. And so tell us about what role you're playing there at Longwood.
So the senior women administrator is a title and position that the NCAA mandates. That's a requirement that each NCAA institution has to have. And so usually it's your highest ranking female in the athletics department, whether it's an administrator or even at Division II or Division III. Sometimes it can double as a coach. You'll see that quite a bit in Division II and III. So for me, that the primary responsibilities there have to do with oh um, things that would come up, disciplinary actions, committee work. It tends to be a much more internal lens. Student athlete welfare can certainly be from Title IX and gender equity aspects, is being a part of those conversations. Um, Personnel decisions at the coaching level. So if you think about trying to be a part of maybe the executive team with the angle of evaluating grievances against coaches or administrators, those types of things where um, an additional voice is needed in the room to make sure that we're looking at this thing from all sides. Typically, the SWA position at the Division I level has a little bit more of an internal side. So if someone's an associate AD or a deputy AD and the SWA, they may be a little bit more inclined to be involved with the academics, graduation rates, APR, scholarships, NCAA legislation, those types of things. I'm a little bit more on the rarer side. You typically don't see external paired with SWA very often. So an interesting twist for me. But it affords me, again, the opportunity to build relationships with people in the industry that have direct lines to athletics directors, to college presidents, conference commissioners, those types of things, is absolutely gives you a fast pass in committee work. As a senior woman administrator, you kind of you make the second round a little bit quicker than you would if you weren't. So I think from my side, it's already afforded me the opportunity to be a part of conversations and department-wide and university-wide decision making that if I were not the SWI, I would absolutely not have a seat at the table. So that's been pretty exciting. I did it a couple times in Division II. When that position was first mandated, you were kind of checking a box a little bit, Joe. So you had to do it, so you checked a box, but there wasn't really a job description tied to it. It's very different now. It's an absolute vital role of any athletics department.
Got you. And what are some of the unique challenges that you face in this role, particularly as you have to think about the business of athletics and trying to remain competitive? What are some of the things that you're trying to drive from a strategy perspective, particularly as it relates to the business side of it? You understand the coaching, but the business side is the other piece that a lot of people don't realize just how much that plays into athletics and at the college level.
Well, I think there's no better time than right now to describe what executive level decision making situations are like with college athletics with coronavirus. It's you can pick up any newspaper and look at what we as administrators and certainly as SWAs are having to do from a crisis management standpoint, the financials, all of the different layers. There's a million layers to this that from the outside eye, you can't imagine the implications of everything that's going on right now. Again, having multiple voices in the room to look at all the different angles on this. Something as simple as, we've canceled all of our fall sports, but yet we're having to adhere to an ESPN Plus broadcast, which requires a certain number of broadcasts. Well, you just chop 50 events off your schedule. Can you still meet your ESPN Plus contract requirements? Um, Simple things for someone like Longwood. We're located in Central Virginia. We're not near any metropolitan area. Taking a look at what the testing requirements are and how we're going to finance that. If all things held equal, we may be performing 750 tests a week in the spring when everything crosses over in spring sports and fall sports and basketball's finishing up. How do you staff that? How do you find a way to test 750 times in a week? So the really kind of in the weeds strategizing and being of service to the internal side, the external side, certainly of the executive side, in making sure that we are creating a maximally positive and beneficial experience for our student athletes in the context of helping drive enrollment for a small Division I institution. It's a huge responsibility. I think again, um, optics, communications, what's our strategy in connecting with the community so that they're aware of what we're doing, what we're not doing. How do we make sure that our constituents are still getting stroked? All these kind of moving parts that, from my standpoint, provides us a seasoned opportunity to be creative and unique, so that when we do return to a non-COVID experience, we've maintained and elevated, so that our day-to-day business operations are only that much better.
Wow. I'm actually tired because that's a lot. I mean, that is a lot to juggle. And I even forgot about the testing element, particularly with all the sports and that crossover. I think seeing the NBA in a bubble, it kind of makes us think
Believe
that
me.
this could be done. And it's not that easy when you're dealing with college students also who sometimes it's a little harder to control. So so that's a
Not sometimes, that's an all the time.
well, I was trying to be fair. Just trying to be fair.
Yeah.
But no, it seems like you have a lot that you have to think about and consider. So I think that is truly going to be interesting how you guys do that and how you manage all the moving parts. One of the things I am curious about is as you think about your role and then as we at the importance of advocating for more women in leadership roles in sports and particularly in college and athletics, talk to us more about where do you see your role in that and how do we begin to advocate for more women in these roles, these executive leadership roles in these universities and colleges.
I think that's a great question and so important. Um, Again, simply, if you just think about kind of a chain reaction of events, there were women that helped me and gave me chances and opportunities along the way from a career development standpoint, um, that certainly influenced my passion to do that for younger coaches. Um, that responsibility that I simply have to give back because someone else gave to me is ultimately what I try to instill and bring up in that next young woman, so that she feels empowered and she feels excellent and she feels prepared and excited about her professional journey, so much so that she wants to do the same thing. So it's kind of like this state of being contagious, if you will, is building that synergy and an excitement where I saw results from someone investing in me, is hopefully the young women that I've had a chance to work with, whether it's student athletes themselves or young coaches or young professionals, that they feel the same way, that, oh man, I want to give back to that young person right there. The other thing is to flat out talk about it. I can't tell you how many coaches that I've talked to that I've said, who are you mentoring right now? Like, to the people that are in my store, who are you mentoring? Yeah. You have to mentor. You have got to mentor the next young person in our business. If we don't do that, the business dies. The talent dies. Right now, women's basketball in general, I think, is highly volatile. The young players that are coming up, if you do not commit to a very strong strategic plan with Gen Z, I don't care if it's basketball or business. Anybody, and I can go off on this forever. Anybody that's like, oh, millennials. Well, we're past millennials. We're in Generation Z. Anyone that says I can't stand these kids, they don't listen. Not true. Have you ever sat down and listened to how intelligent and how bright they are, the ideas and the creativity they have? And so building a communication strategy for coaches that are a little bit older, that maybe can't quite make that connection in a traditional sense, doesn't mean that the connection can't be made. And so the commitment to a communication strategy during the mentoring process with younger women is extremely important. It's one thing for me to say, well, you need to mentor young women so that we have brighter women coming forward. That's only half of it, Joe. The other half is you actually have to know how to connect with the next generation. I think that's the piece where professional development organizations like the WBCA or the NABC really, really can do a great job by initiating recommendations and suggestions on how do you connect with young coaches. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just listen. That's hard for me because I talk a lot. But it is, at the end of the day, there is nothing greater than watching a young woman, whether it was a player or a coach, take that next step or reach that goal or have that dream. And they pick up the phone and they're like, oh my God, I can't believe this. Guess what happened? And that, oh, we talked about that. Like, I believed in her and she did it. It's, I don't know why else you would do this. There isn't enough money in this business. Otherwise, I'd be doing what you're doing on some form or fashion. Although I don't, you're way smarter than I am. But it is, that's where I get my joy from. And if the sport is going to grow, we have a responsibility to that. Softball, volleyball are passing women's basketball right now. If anybody tells you otherwise, they're just naive, or they just are trying to stay in denial. They are stepping outside the box and moving away from a model that the men have followed. Softball and their plan is nothing like baseball. They've created their own identity. It's one of the biggest challenges with basketball is the identity of the game continues to try to mirror the men's. And until there's just some more across the board industry-wide investment in creating a unique identity, I think we're going to continue to run into challenges. So empowering the women that are in the sport, it's a big piece of it.
Awesome. And I think you mentioned it's one thing about mentoring some of the up and coming younger coaches, but then the one thing you mentioned is some of the older coaches that have to adjust. And it's really about how do you have some of that reverse mentoring for them to understand how to relate. And it's tough as you move through generations. And if you're 2 or 3 generations removed, sometimes it is a little harder. But in your role, you have to stay on top of these things because you have to be able to manage everyone around you. And I think in order for you to maximize the talent of your players, you have to be able to understand and tap into the heart, into the mindset, because the talent is going to be there. The skill set will be there. It's really the mindset that you have to be able to tap into.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things you kind of mentioned as the game has shifted, obviously with women's basketball, the game has changed. Athletes are bigger, they're faster, they're stronger, they're more skilled. When you look at the WNBA, years ago, if you had a young woman that was 6'5", 6'6", she's probably in the post. Now, just like the men's game, they're out there, they're more agile, they're mobile, they're handling the ball. How have you observed and look at the changing dynamics of the athletes that are coming in and just the changing of the game? And what is your perspective on that? And how do you see Longwood and some of these coaches needing to adapt? You mentioned some of that around the mindset, but the athletes are different and they demand different ways in how you coach them as well. So maybe tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, no, it's exciting to see, right? I mean, the game has improved. There's just no doubt about it. You had incredible individual players 25, 30 years ago. We would talk about 1 or 2 stars or maybe 3 or 4 big names in the game, and now it's the starting 5. Shoot, the top 7 players at UConn. I mean, you can go across the board to see how the evolution of the fitness and training industry has impacted better performance is really pretty cool. And technology, of course, has a big piece to do that. And simply just the game growing also. The opportunities for young girls to participate is at an absolute abundance. I think again, going back to what we were just talking about with connecting with players, there still is the mental understanding of the game. You still have to teach the game. I think that's where some of the biggest challenges are, certainly for Division III, Division II, small Division I, a place like Longwood in the Big South Conference, is you still got to know how to play. And I can train up a kid. We can get 15 pounds on her. She can be the strongest post. What are her hands like? Does she have good hands? Does she have good feet? Does she know how to execute an offensive system? Does she understand how to make decisions in a pressure cooker situation? Am I doing my job as a leader to prepare my players for those moments? I think sometimes that can get lost a little bit. I'm sure you can watch YouTube videos on player development where, I mean, a kid might be juggling pickles with a basketball in one hand, and you're like, what are you doing, man? Like, just do a ball handling drill, just where you see some of these kind of really outlandish tactics when the fundamentals of the game have remained the same. I think preparing the mind is the element now. Is the body has come along, right? So the players are they're strong, and the women are capable of so much. Just because my body can do it doesn't mean that my mind can. And I think that's the part that is really a unique challenge for coaches right now. You have all this technology. Joe, if you could see the stuff that you can do with video and everything right now, I mean, we were back in like VHS days, like you pop the tape in, is I mean, to like do your own like highlight video was like a really big task back then. So taking advantage of the technology is the first part. Getting your kids excited to come in the office and work on almost what I would consider quarterback level preparation when you think about how QBs prepare for games, and the film, hours of film don't lie, is helping them to have a mental strategy to be more of a student of the game, is where I think the body's caught up. We're here now. But we got to keep doing this. If you're going to have all this strength and you have power and you have endurance and agility and you can jump higher and you can be faster, you got to put that in something, because the other guy, the other woman planning on the other side, is developing their defensive scheme, and to not take that into consideration is fool's gold. And that's where you see ultimately, the top. It's one of the biggest drawbacks to our game in the women's games is we continue to have kind of this top 5, top 10 mentality where you see the same teams going over and over and over again. Is how do we get more teams in the mix? And I think mental preparedness and understanding of the game probably has a little bit to do with that.
Got you. And you mentioned one thing around the utilization of technology, and as you see more data analytics being introduced in sports and athletics, tell me about how you are using that in the coaching realm, particularly around technology, data analytics, and trying to understand how data can help put players in position to be successful, or understanding positions of the game where they may be less successful. Talk to us about how you're using technology and data.
Yeah. So I kind of, with all the Division II roots and not being able to afford any of that, so I kind of like hemmed it on it. I'm like, technology, that's ridiculous. Until I got to Marshall University, where in when I was there, this would have been a few years ago. The men's team there, they had a ton of success that year. They won the Conference USA championship, and I cannot think of why I'm drawing a blank. Their men's coach, his brother is the head coach at the Houston Rockets. I'm totally drawing a blank. But he was the first person I heard talk about the hardcore statistics that were coming out of the NBA regarding 3-point shot attempts versus 2-point shot attempts. And that the mid-range game, the 2-point long-range shot, could really devastate you. And so watching him teach his philosophy on the floor in regards to 3-point shooting attempts and layups, and that these two shots in conjunction with free throws would statistically position them for a greater level of success. And it wasn't just, hey, this is what we're going to do. This was our whole offensive systems are around these 3 types of shots, nothing else. That's it. These are the only shots that we're going to take. If you take one of the other ones, I'm going to sit your butt down. But to watch him implement a system with a particular group of players that was a match for that, and then see them commit to it, it was telling. It was absolutely telling, and seeing the results that came from a commitment to the numbers. You think about Moneyball. You think about the baseball side of things. I mean, that was the first time that statistics really became relevant in regards to your decision making. It wasn't like, oh, that kid's a good shooter. Like, I want him to do this, and then the numbers, look at the numbers. And it opened my eyes tremendously. I think, again, there's a competitive advantage to be had if coaches do look behind the numbers a little bit more than we traditionally have. I'm not saying that everything is hinged on that. I still think that there's a human element to the game, especially, especially in certain situations. But when I tell a kid that the film doesn't lie, the numbers don't either.
Yeah.
So, be a little bit more of an investigator as to why these numbers look the way that they do. Are there some adjustments? Can a little tweak here, or whose whose pass percentages are better? What type of pass is resulting in better play action? What side of the floor is the ball located? Just a simple statistic on where are your shot percentages? Are they on the right side of the floor? Or are they on the left side of the floor? If I'm looking at all of this is hilarious. If my best shot selection is coming to the right side of the floor, but my offense, I initiate the offense to the right side with a ball reversal to the left, and I'm not reversing the ball back to the right, why don't I just run the offense to the left side of the floor, reverse it to the right, and score on the side of the floor where I score all my points?
Right.
It sounds ridiculous, but coaches, our heads pop off our bodies. So we're like, no, wait, I want to run the offense to the right because I'm right-handed and all I think about is the right side. So it can get pretty funny, but I do think the college game is benefiting from it. There's just no doubt about it.
Great. And I think a lot of people lose sight that there's a technology and data that comes in and how you look at the game now. Now, there is a balance, right? You can use the data and analytics, but at the end of the day, you still have to go out and execute. And it's one thing to say, hey, this 30-foot shot is a high percentage shot. That's true, but only if you're Steph Curry,
Right.
Damian Lillard, and it's not intended for everyone. And it's a one thing to be able to say this is a high percentage shot now, but you have to be able to hit it at a high percentage as well. So I think that is key. So
And
very
I
good.
have to say this, Joe. It's Dan D'Antoni, who's at Marshall, and his brother is the D'Antoni at Houston. So
Gotcha.
he was on staff with him, and that's where that system came from. But it's fascinating to watch.
Okay. Yeah, and I wasn't sure because I know with the Houston Rockets, they use a lot of analytics and data
Yep.
in their organization in general. Well, at least Daryl Morey used to. Now that he's transitioned out, but that's a classic example. The data tells you one thing: we can play small ball, 6'7", 6'6", and under. But it's one thing to say we can win this way. It's another to be able to execute it when you go against another team that can play small ball, but they're 6'11" and under, and their smallest player is 6'8", like a LeBron James. So,
Absolutely.
so that execution
Yep.
is key to go with the data. And at the end of the day, you mentioned talent, skill, and the fundamentals. They always, reign supreme when you're in a sport, particularly
Well,
when it comes down to it.
the chemistry side. I mean, you can, gosh, I mean, the Miami Heat. I mean, boy, were they fun to watch, and just they talked about the old school things like a jersey being tucked in practice. I mean, some of the getting back to the basics of putting everybody on the same level, and that the players sold that. And I think I think it was Shane Battier that said a player coach team is always better than a coach team, is when the players can hold each other accountable. So again, you can have all the technology in the world. Guy shows up late for practice, or this girl like misses curfew or whatever. There's, again, the human element still can win the day on occasion.
That's a great point, and would love to get your thoughts because you speak to how you build a culture, right? How you build a culture of a team, and I actually relate this to as I manage teams because I call it the Carolina system. Dean Smith didn't teach you Carolina culture. It was the upperclassmen who taught you Carolina culture, and it was just a foundation that was established. So tell me more about how you think about culture and what do you do to kind of help shape it and build it so that way the culture facilitates the way the team or the organization moves versus if you rely on a leader and if that leader leaves, that culture will not be sustainable. So tell me
Yeah.
more about how you look at that and how you're trying to shape culture there at Longwood.
Well, this kind of goes back to what we were talking about in regards to empowering young women. And I certainly, as far as I'm concerned, early on in my coaching career, the culture was set by one person, and that was me. You either did what I said or you didn't. And if you didn't, you were gone. Okay, that doesn't work anymore. So it for me, it is 100% investing in the people in your organization. It is empowering them. It is listening to them. It is helping them find their voice. And through that, that whether it's the younger people in the organization, that the people that I'm empowering empower the people that, if you're thinking about an organizational chart, that they're carrying on that message, because you're absolutely right. I can invest all my time and energy into the greatest person on my team. He, she, or whatever, they're going to graduate or they're going to take another job, and then I'm SOL and I'm going to have to do it all over again. Is a culture, as far as I'm concerned, is something that stands the test of time. And in order for that to move, it's in the fabric, it's in the roots, and it's in the voices of the people that come into the organization. Within that, who you recruit, who you hire, who the people are that I seek out as members of my team, have to match the culture in some form or fashion to a degree before they even arrive. So from an HR standpoint, the questions, the answers that I'm looking for when I interview people and when I'm screening applicants for positions, I'm looking for the threads in those conversations. And I'm not even talking about a resume. I'm talking about when you get them on the phone, when you sit down in front of them, is that their threads match what we're weaving over here. But to have people within the team and organization be able to articulate, and then of course in action, emulate what that culture looks like as we're evaluating who do we want on our team. It's this person wants to work here. Do we want you here? Do we want you to be a part of this? Because by generating that type of a match from the beginning, once we've established it through the investment and belief of the people that are part of the organization, to me, that's where it's the time piece comes into play. But it really, in my mind, culture is highly collaborative, especially these days. It's everybody generating energy together towards this common goal. You might generate your part a little bit differently than I generate, but the goal is up here. Each person may arrive there differently. All that matters is we reach the goal. I don't care if you do it one way and I do the other. I used to say at the end, I hired an assistant coach once who was great with late game situations, because I sucked at making play calls at the end. I hated making play calls as a head coach under 2 minutes. So I looked in the mirror and said, "You're not very good at this, Katie." Well, fine. So I hired a guy who is. So I think there's some valid self-analysis as well as a leader as you start to develop your culture. Where are the gaps? If this is what I want, who or what type of people are going to help me generate a culture like this? So I think that at least from my experience, and I'm sure there's tremendous people out there. You've worked for some of the greatest industry leaders in the world. But I do think for me to say the culture is this is Katie's way. I just don't know how long that's going to work in today's climate. I think it takes, here's where we want to be great, and we need these kind of people to make it happen.
So no, that is great, and I love those leadership principles that you live by, and I think that goes across any industry, because leadership is leadership regardless of what industry, what role, and it doesn't necessarily mean you need to be in a formal leadership role. You have leaders that don't have the role that can have those. So I love that discipline and that thought. So as we prepare to close out, I always like to leave the audience with three things before we go. And these could be things that you want, if they don't take anything from this podcast episode today, these are the three things you want to leave them with. What are those three things you want to leave us with today?
See, and I thought about this and I was like, I should write these things down, but I thought I'd be a little bit more off the cuff. I think one of the first things, Joe, um, is what we do with failure. And that was one of the biggest learning experiences in my life, was to go through not having my contract renewed at Lenore Ryan, and feeling like I'd spent all this time in 20 years of lifting people up and helping them prepare for jobs. And like people would call me to help them get a job. How could I be the one that, I won games? I mean, Like, how can you not be renewing my contract? I've checked all the boxes. Is making sure that who you are as a professional or what your job is doesn't define you. I put 20 years in, and all I thought of myself was as a basketball coach. And not one time in those 20 years, not once, thought about who I was, that I was a good friend, that I was a good daughter, that I was a great sister, an awesome auntie. I did not identify myself as anything but my job. I have to imagine that that spreads the gaps of a lot of industries, that that's not just a coaching thing, but certainly in coaching. Yeah, I'm a coach too, and I'm a teacher, but that under no circumstance does that define who I am as a human. And I wish I would have learned that lesson a whole lot earlier than I did. So that would be number one, is the job doesn't define me. The human piece defines me. Um, I think another thing was, um, to be less risk averse when it comes to trying new things and doing different things in the job. I got really good at hiring people who were experts in areas that I wasn't, which is a good thing, until I made a career pivot and I don't have the opportunity to hire a person for something that I need. Is making sure that I am brushed up on what are the latest trends or the tips or the techniques that I might need to know a little bit about, so that I can be a piece of duct tape. I can fill a gap. Is to find the time. Certainly, when it comes to technology, if anybody listens to this and they're like, "Oh, this is what I do," are you as good at technology right now as you could be? And I know for me, something as simple as Adobe Photoshop and social media graphics. It sounds ridiculous, but I always had assistants to do that. What happens if everybody catches coronavirus and nobody can work? Someone's got to do the graphic.
Right.
So is to find the time to brush up on a few of the other things. The last thing would be the consummate thing about work-life balance. It's okay. I absolutely believe this, certainly as you get further along in your career. It's okay for me to say that I am not okay. It is absolutely okay for me to say that. Um, when I decided to leave coaching at Georgia State, and I'm not saying that this would have changed the decision, I never thought to walk into Gene Hill's office and say, Gene, if I don't take a break, if I don't take a break for a couple months and take a sabbatical like the rest of the universe does, I'm going to probably quit my job. I didn't do that. I didn't know that I could do that. I didn't give him a chance to say, no, you're not going to do that. And I would have done what I did anyway. Or he might have said, what do we want to do here? Can we create something? I robbed him of the opportunity to try to work together on something because I was too afraid to say I wasn't okay. And I think we do ourselves and the people that we work with and for a grave disservice by not being honest about our mental health and our wellness in general. And if it does nothing else other than identify people that I don't want to work for, it certainly allows the really great people in business and in industry to be a part of my personal solution.
Awesome. I love that. Really, thank you for sharing. And I think um, these are things that we all probably can do better at in terms of being risk averse, making sure that we can take care of ourselves. It's like it all we hear every time we travel. We hear this every time we get on the plane. Put your oxygen mask on first
Yep.
before you assist others. And
Yep.
if we don't do that, we can never be the full version of ourselves, and we can never be what people need us to be because we haven't taken care of the core in ourselves first. So thank you for sharing those three things. So as we close out, I want to thank Katie for joining us today. It's been a pleasure just hearing her journey and her story and just how she's been able to navigate point to point from role, from university, and looking forward to some of the great things she's going to be doing in administration and athletics. And so, Katie, I want to thank you for taking your time out and just sharing with us your wonderful career that you've been able to establish and cultivate for yourself.
Thank you, Joe. It's been awesome.
Yep. So as the audience, as you guys tune in, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and looking forward to hearing and seeing better things from Kate in the future. So thank you.
Thank you.